All right. It's a couple minutes after 12. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully, everybody has gotten tuned in. Welcome back. Here we are again, Partnership for Children of Guilford County Healthy Relationships Initiative, the YWCA, bringing parents across the triad some very timely information. We're looking at managing family emotions, which is very important today as we head back to school, and already had some glitches, but this is just very timely, and I feel like it's very fortuitous how we've had. So we welcome everybody here who's with us. We're especially thankful to Christine Murray and Lamisha Staten, who will be sharing and presenting today. And just want to thank you guys all again for tuning in, and I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you so much, Alice. We definitely appreciate the continued partnership between our agencies to make sure that we are providing family resource information to families all across Guilford County. And as Alice said, we know this is a very timely discussion about managing family emotions, especially as we are returning back to school today. So we're excited to present this topic to you. And feel free, if you have any questions for us, just drop them in the comments and we'll try to do our best to address those questions. Next slide. So as we get started, we want to talk about some common stressors for families. What is everybody going through? But we understand that this morning there was a glitch in the system with Canvas and some other platforms. So we know that was a stressor for our families. And we want to commend all of you for getting through that. And we know it's going to take some patience for us, but we're going to make it through it. But also, as we're going through this time of COVID-19, we do want to acknowledge some common things that families have been experiencing. One being safe and secure housing. We have been having the conversation about making sure that we have affordable housing for families for a very long time. That still at this time is a very important topic as we talk about that. And we know there are several agencies working together to make sure that is something that is addressed. Also, access to food and nutrition. We have programs like the WIC program and other community agencies that are working around food and nutrition to make sure that families have what they need so that they can stay healthy and have access to healthy foods. But that has been a common stress, especially as we talk about job loss and different things like that, that families may have experienced some financial difficulties. So we do want to acknowledge that. Also, staying safe from COVID-19. How many times have we heard the three W's? Wear your face covering, wait 6 feet apart, and wash your hands. So we're always trying to stay mindful of doing the three W's. It can be a little stressful, but it's always trying to make sure we're in that right space to stay safe for COVID. And we know especially for our families with small children, that is a definite concern for any families that we might have, any pregnant moms that are expecting or families that are expecting babies. We want to make sure we keep those families safe. So we know that that is something that is a concern and a stressor. Also, securing childcare. A lot of families experience a disruption in childcare during this time of COVID-19. And we know that did place a hardship on a lot of families. The state of North Carolina has done a wonderful job in trying to make sure that they continue to provide access to childcare to families, especially our first responders. And we went through a lot of different changes over the past several months, but we do know that childcare has been a stressor for a lot of families. Back to school planning. Today being the first day of school, families were trying to figure out, what are we going to do? How is the school year going to look like? How do I plan our day? How do I get back from the summer mode to being back in school? So we know that's been a very, very stressful topic in a lot of households here in Guilford County and across our nation, of folks just trying to figure out, what are we going to do? What is our family plan? So we know that families are working through that and just hanging there. We're going to get through it. Also, securing work and gainful employment. Unfortunately, a lot of individuals in our state did go through a loss of employment. And we know that families, as we said, the items that you see here on the screen, families are trying to work through these things and trying to figure out, how do I get another job? How do I get better employment? How can I make sure I can have a job that's going to provide the resources needed to having a savings account if something else happens in the fall or next year? How am I going to make it through that? So that's another stressor right now families are dealing with. Also, we have a lot of families, a lot of parents. A lot of you have transitioned from working in an office every day to working at home. Some folks went through the transition for maybe a month or two or three, and some folks maybe are working at home through the end of the year, the beginning of next year. And we know that has definitely, as I'm sure a lot of you can imagine, as you see, that has been a very, very hard transition for a lot of us. So working remotely, especially if you have children at home, has been a stressor for a lot of families. How do we get through that? How do I manage my work responsibilities and make sure that my child receives the attention that they need? And so that has been a stressor. And then the last two, concern for family members and friends' well-being. We know we have a lot of grandparents that are taking care of children. We have a lot of our family members that are older. So how do we keep them safe? The children want to see their grandparents, but at the same time, we want to keep our grandparents safe and secure and make sure that they're healthy. So that has been a concern, and making, calling each other, making sure, are you okay? Have you gotten tested? Those are types of things that we're also concerned about. And then lastly, the news. Every time we're turning on, we've got to stay up to date. But then a lot of times just turning on the news can be stressful. You're hearing about, the counts going up, and different things happening, earthquakes and hurricanes and different things that are happening has been a definite stressor for families. So we do acknowledge that these are just some, not all, just some of the stressors that our families are dealing with right now. Next slide. I do want to just acknowledge here and just wanted to share this flyer with you. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services has developed plenty, just tons of wonderful resources for families and for businesses all across our state. And this is just one of the social media images that they've developed on managing anxiety and stress. It is very important, and I know a lot of you probably feel the same way. We have been very appreciative to our state and our state leadership on how they have acknowledged the stress that families are dealing with and trying to put resources in place. So just look at these three items here that they have here to just kind of minimize the stress and help us minimize the anxiety that we're going through. Number one, making sure that you get facts from reliable sources. There are plenty of folks out there, plenty of platforms that are providing information on COVID or different things, but we want to make sure that we are getting information from those reliable sources to keep our families safe. Making sure that you're following the CDC guidelines, making sure that you're following our state guidelines, very, very important. Also, talking with your family and friends. Do not minimize or, just put out to the side that, hey, I don't have to worry about my family. You definitely want to stay connected, whether it's sending a text or getting on a group chat. Those connections are very important, will help to minimize and lower the stress that we're feeling. So even though you might not be able to go to the family cookout, or we might not be able to have the family reunion like we normally would, you still want to stay connected. That is very important. And also staying connected with your social support system. So a lot of us are on Facebook, you're on Instagram, you're on Twitter, you're on different other platforms. That's very important. Letting people know that you're there to support them and that you're also wanting to stay connected is very important. So if you're looking for some more resources like this, just visit them at NCDHHS COVID-19 NC resources, and you'll see all of this and more resources they have for us. Next slide. Okay, so here we just wanted to talk about keeping your family healthy, happy, and whole. What are some ways that we can keep our families healthy? First, we want to acknowledge the kids. The kids have been, our children have been through so much. This has been, I was thinking back to when I was younger. I cannot imagine what it would have been like just experiencing something like this. So our children are going through something that we haven't experienced. Hopefully, the next generation will have more things in place to handle something like this. But our children right now are dealing with a lot. And we want to acknowledge the importance of sitting our kids down, talking to them about the concerns, talking to them about the news. We may be watching the news, they walk through the room and they're hearing something and maybe they're confused or it just brings some questions on. It's okay to sit down, have those family conversations to talk about their feelings. How are they feeling? How are we feeling as a family? And how can we move forward together? Secondly, parents, practice self care. This is very, very important. Go out to the track, Greensboro, High Point. We have wonderful parks in our county. We have wonderful places where you can read, you can meditate. Do not also remember to get rest and have some quiet time. That is key. Sometimes you got to turn off the TV, you got to put the phone aside and just have some you time. That is very important, especially for our parents. A lot of you are dealing with a lot right now. Make sure you get some time just for you. You're doing a great job. And we want to say that from our heart that you are doing a great job. And we want to make sure that you get some time for you during this. Also, plan some fun activities. Take a trip, if it's right into the lake or, make sure you have your mask and you're practicing your 3 W's. But, take some time to do still some fun activities, even if it's at home, in the backyard, or on your porch, somewhere where you can do something safely together as a family. That is very key. Still try to keep those family meals. Family time is important. Sitting down, how was your day? How are we feeling? To talk together as a family. And then still keeping with implementing your daily routines. That is very highly important. Keeping with the daily routine helps to normalize your family schedule. A lot of children, this has caused a lot of crisis and a lot of things, but as we can, as possible, trying to keep a routine is highly important for children, and will help us as a family to get through this together. And then lastly, relax, listen, learn, and support one another. We are in this together. All of us, we may have different circumstances, but we are experiencing this for the first time together, and we're going to get through this together. So let's just hang in there and we'll get through it. Lastly, this is another resource from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services that I just wanted to share with you. And this is a wonderful resource called The Scoop on Managing Stress. S is for stay connected to family and friends. C is for compassion for yourself and others. Self-compassion decreases trauma symptoms and stress. Don't forget to check in with yourself also to see how you're feeling. That first O is for observe your use of substances. So we want to make sure that where it says early intervention can prevent problems. So just making sure that we're keeping check on that. And then the second O is okay to ask for help. It is okay. If you're struggling, if you're going through with something, it is okay to ask for help. It is okay to say, I'm struggling, I'm having a hard time. Reach out to folks that can help, especially your family and friends. And then lastly, that P, physical activity to improve your mood. Even a simple walk can improve your mood and help you get through your day. And then we just wanted to just mention this 1-855 number is Hope for NC Help. If you are dealing with any type of stress, if you just need somebody to talk to, definitely check out this phone number here. They have professionals there to help you, and we just wanted to share that with you at this time as well as you're getting through dealing with stress.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Christine Murray, and I'm with the UNCG Center for Youth, Family, and Community Partnerships, as well as with the Healthy Relationships Initiative. And I want to start by talking with you about some strategies for problem solving, and then we'll move into looking at some specific emotions that you as a parent or your children might be experiencing right now, so that we can better understand those emotions and consider different possible ways of managing them. So I want to start with the problem solving piece though, because really anytime we're going through something that is emotional or challenging or that is stressful for us, there's two different ways that we can cope with those challenges. So the first one is to kind of work through the problems associated with those challenges. And then the second is to work through our emotions with those challenges. sometimes, of course, we're facing problems and challenges in life that are things that can't necessarily be solved. So for example, if you have experienced a loss of a loved one, or right now, of course, there's only so much that we can do to solve the problem that we're facing, which is the bigger picture problem of the pandemic and all of the stress that that carries for people. So we have to kind of think through at every given moment when we're facing challenges, is this something that I should be focusing on managing my emotions? Or is this something where this is actually a problem that I can think through how to solve? And a lot of times, even if it's something that we can't change, like we're in this really bad situation with the pandemic, we're having a lot of challenges with that right now, we can't solve it. We can't just magically wave a magic wand and make COVID-19 go away. But a lot of times we can look at some specific problems that we're facing within that and think through how can we manage those problems in a healthier, more adaptive way. So because we all can face a lot of different problems, like Lumisha talked about earlier on, there's a lot of different stressors and challenges that people are facing right now. It's helpful to have a really basic framework as a family for how you can approach different problems. And this family problem solving model that I'm about to present to you is something that really can be used for a lot of different types of challenges, whether it's a big picture challenge or even just smaller things or more immediate concerns. Like, for example, as Lamisha mentioned earlier, those of us who are parents know that across the state in North Carolina today, first day of school and the system goes down. We have a problem. What are we supposed to do about it? So this problem solving model really starts by identifying the problem, which sounds like a bit of a simple step, but oftentimes we can feel a lot of stress and we don't even know why we're feeling that stress, or we're not sure about what's causing us to feel overwhelmed. So it's helpful to sit down first or talk it over with your family members or someone else that you know and trust to really identify the problem. And really, I think in this day and age, problems, multiple problems. Most of us are not just dealing with one problem, we're dealing with a lot of different problems. And so we may need to actually repeat this process or think about managing multiple problems at one time. So you might have a problem related to childcare. You might have a problem related to helping your children to do their best academically in the remote environment. You may have problems related to your finances or your career situation. So you can really kind of break this down for each specific problem. And sometimes it is helpful to get to that really basic level of like writing down a list of the different problems that you're facing and then try to focus on one at a time. We are in very overwhelming times, and so it can be helpful to really try to hone in on one area of your life to focus on and then look at those other areas later. So once you've identified the problem, it's helpful to examine it. Take some time to think through what specifically about this issue is causing you stress. What are the challenges that you're facing related to this problem? Who's involved in this problem? Who might be possible sources of support for this problem? Is the problem related to a lack of information? Is the problem related to a challenge in relationships or communication? Is the challenge related to some sort of uncertainty in your environment, like school or your workplace? So really try to just explore it and just think through, reflect on what are the challenges that are associated with this problem. Next, think through, what have you done to solve similar problems in the past? Now, that's one of the things that is very difficult about a lot of the problems and challenges that people are facing right now. We don't have a roadmap. We don't have past experiences necessarily to draw upon because this is a relatively new situation. But of course, since we're talking about back to school, I think that while the period of time from March when schools kind of shut down till the end of the school year, while that's different than what schools look like now, that can be a useful time to think about, okay, what did we try during that time frame? What worked for us? What didn't work? Which gets us to the fourth point there of really thinking through, what have we done to address this problem and how effective were they? And if you as a parent are finding that what you did earlier in the remote learning in March was not at all effective, just know that that's okay, that you're not alone, that it was a totally brand new situation, but maybe there are a few small things that seem to help, like taking breaks throughout the day, or figuring out ways to connect with people virtually so that your kids still had some social connection. So really try to think through what worked, what helped for us, and what didn't work. And a lot of times, from my background in counseling, a lot of times in counseling, we think about helping our clients think through what's worked for you in the past. Try to do more of that. And if it hasn't worked, stop doing it. Try to find a new alternative solution. So once you've kind of looked at the past solutions that you've tried, try to kind of set those aside and do some brainstorming. And I think it's really helpful with brainstorming to involve a lot of different people. So you on your own can do some brainstorming, but it's even more helpful if you involve multiple people. And sometimes parents are a little bit afraid of involving their kids in brainstorming because they think, well, my kid's going to come up with crazy ideas like, give me $100 for every day that I get my homework done, which is, of course, not something that the vast majority of us would at all consider doing. But maybe there's some clues in the solutions that come up. So when we're brainstorming, we're really trying to think about every possible idea, every possible solution that might work. And the really key part when you're doing any sort of brainstorming is not to try to judge those solutions. So don't immediately say to your child, if they say, well, give me $100 every day I do my homework, don't immediately say no. Just write it down on a list. Keep a list of every possible idea and try to be as creative as you possibly can be in that moment. Because oftentimes it's through that creative brainstorming process where you'll find a lot of new creative possible solutions that come up. So once you've got a really big list of possible solutions, whether that's from looking at effective solutions from the past or looking at new creative ideas that come up through the brainstorming, just choose one to try. Think about the one that seems to kind of rise to the top and be the most effective for you, and consider experimenting with that. Seeing what would work. What would work if you maybe don't give your child $100 a day, but maybe $1 a day or 50 cents a day, or some sort of other incentive that maybe you'd play a game with them at the end of the day if they complete all of their schoolwork, something that's a real treat for them, or go for a bike ride in the neighborhood. So try to think of what your solution is and try to experiment and give yourself some time to see how it goes. Oftentimes it really takes some time for new solutions to take effect. So give yourself, whether it's a week or a month or whatever time frame makes sense for you, give yourself some time to try out your solutions. I would not recommend that you're constantly trying new solutions like every single day. I know that that can become something that's sort of tempting as a parent. Like if it seems like, oh, this didn't work today, I'm not going to do it anymore. But again, sometimes it really does take some time to see how things are going to work. And then after that sort of testing period ends, go back and talk through with your family and see how well did that work for us. Maybe it's working great and there's nothing more that needs to be done. Maybe it was a complete failure, and that's okay too, that we're all learning. Think of this time as a very experimental time frame where we're going to have to try some new solutions and try adapting them. And sometimes you'll find that a solution might be working partially, but there are more things that you could do. Like maybe you would add something else on top of it. So this is a process that really can be repeated over and over again, whether it's for the same problem or possibly it might be for new problems that start to arise. So now I'm going to move on from the problem solving model and start to think about emotions and how do we manage different emotions. And I think that this is a really important topic of developing emotional awareness, emotional maturity, and emotional intelligence. And of course, maybe we don't all want to be thrust into this experience that is making us all, have a lot of emotions come to the top, but challenging times tend to do that. And I think that one of the reasons why they can be valuable for helping us to grow in a lot of different ways is because they give us opportunities to learn to manage our emotions and to understand them better. So we're going to move on to talking about some specific emotions that your family might be facing right now. And I think that this is helpful because we can talk about some great strategies for managing uncomfortable emotions, like Lumisha shared already, like going out for a walk or connecting with your support network. But especially when we can start to understand some really specific emotions, then we can start to think about, okay, what can I do to help myself navigate this particular emotion in a healthy way? So the first emotion that I am going to cover, we've already talked a little bit about it, but I wanted to say a little bit more, is stress and anxiety. So stress and anxiety, like Lumisha said earlier, is very common right now. Of course, we've got a lot of different stressful situations. And so for each of these emotions that we'll cover, I'll share a little bit about why this possible emotion might be a challenge right now. And then what are some tips specifically for that emotion? So when we're talking about stress and anxiety, and actually Lumisha and I, along with the YWCA of High Point, we recently did a whole program on managing stress, which you can find through the YWCA's archived videos on Facebook, where we talked a lot more about this in depth if you're interested in learning more. But basically, when we are feeling stress or when we're feeling anxiety, we are perceiving that we're encountering a situation that is going to really test our coping resources. And that might be because it actually is going to test those coping resources, or it feels like more than it can handle, or it might just be that we have a perception like, I don't feel like I can handle this situation. It's too much for me. So if you find yourself thinking that, like, this is just too much for me, I can't handle it, chances are you're facing a lot of stress and anxiety right now. And I will sort of also differentiate that I usually think of stress as more of an immediate kind of state of feeling, whereas anxiety tends to be something that can be a lot more lasting, and there may not be a specific cause to it. So a few different tips for managing stress and anxiety are listed here. One of the big ones is just trying to figure out what works for you. And like Lamisha said, going out and taking a walk or getting some physical activity, that can be a great relief of stress for a lot of people. Sometimes people, though, don't find that to be stressful or stress relieving. They might benefit more from doing things like relaxation breathing or calling a friend. So the most important thing is to really spend some time experimenting, maybe even going through that problem solving process that we just talked about, to think through what are some ways that work for you. But one of the big key ones, and I know as a parent for myself, one of the big things that I've been doing to manage my stress and anxiety during these really uncertain times of back to school is using positive self-talk. And first of all, the first piece of that is monitoring your self-talk and starting to look at how are you talking to yourself. And then the second part is trying to replace negative thoughts or negative self-talk with more empowering and stress relieving ways of looking at situations. So, for example, we've talked about it a couple of times already just this morning. Families get online, try to log into Canvas, feeling stressed out. I need to be doing this. And this is what I was told to do. I can't do it. What am I supposed to do? Now, if you're using negative self-talk, you might be immediately saying, this whole school year is going to be a disaster, or I knew that this wasn't going to work out, or I just can't handle this. There's no way that I'm going to be able to handle this schooling situation right now. So that way of talking to yourself is going to be something that's going to increase your stress. You're going to get more stressed by the dialogue in your head than even based on the actual kind of experience that's in front of you. So it's helpful to look at those thoughts, and there may be some truth to that, like that it is very overwhelming and it's going to be frustrating. But you also might be able to use self-talk to help remind yourself, for example, like I reminded myself, every kid across the state of North Carolina is in the same boat. Every family is in the same boat that's using these systems. And we just have to trust. Maybe I don't have the information right now, but I can trust that they're working this out. We'll figure this out together as a family. And even just some reassuring statements like, I can handle this. It's going to be okay. This is going to be a stressful transition, but we'll get through it. We'll figure this out over time. I don't need to have it all figured out on the first day. So really try to practice using some positive self-talk for yourself, just so that you're balancing the negative thoughts that might be coming up. Lumisha already talked a little bit about this next point about just being sure that you're taking care of yourself physically as well as mentally and emotionally. So practicing that self-care. The next point, learning to use relaxation strategies. I find sometimes right now that these are very stressful, very busy times. So I may not have time to go do a full, yoga class online, or to have a really long extended conversation with a trusted friend or family member in the middle of a stressful moment. But sometimes I can just take 3 deep breaths, and that is enough to give me a very quick way to sort of calm down, to handle what's going on in that moment very quickly. Like Lamisha did say earlier, it is though really valuable to have some trusted friends and family members that you can reach out to and talk to. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to be a phone call. It doesn't have to be an in-person conversation. It could be a text messaging chat, or it could be using Messenger on Facebook, or a chat with people through Google Chat, or whatever it may be. That think about different ways of staying connected, and especially try to connect with people who are in the same boat as you. That you can reach out to for support. It is important for any of these emotions that we're talking about today to really know some of the signs for extreme distress. And why that's so important is that it can be really necessary sometimes to reach out for more than just a friend and family member, but for a professional help. So if you are really finding that your stress, anxiety, sadness, fear, whatever the other emotions might be, are getting in the way of your ability to manage the demands of life, know that you can reach out for support. And so really look for those signs. We're all going to have difficult days here and there at this point in time, but we also have to be mindful that sometimes we just need to reach out for help. Sometimes we've reached a point where we really do need some extra support, and there should be no shame in that. We all need a little bit of help and support sometimes. So I'm going to move on now to talking about another emotion that I think is really challenging for a lot of people right now, and that is fear. And normally we think about fear, we're afraid of sharks, we're afraid of bees, snakes, I'm afraid of all of those things too. But in many ways, for most of us right now, our fears are more about things that we can't see. We're afraid of catching a virus that we can't see. We're afraid of the uncertainty of a situation. We're afraid of financial challenges. So really now we kind of need to think more broadly about fear. And that one way to think about why we experience fear is that it's any situation that feels uncertain or threatening to our emotional or physical safety. So of course there are some physical safety concerns that many of us have, but a lot of us right now are struggling more with our emotional fears or our threats to our safety emotionally. And especially, I think as adults, we can relate to this, but also be on the lookout for this with your children if you're a parent, and understand that kids, really when we're talking about any of these emotions, but especially fear, they may not always say to you, I'm afraid of failing at school. I'm afraid that I'm never going to see my friends again. I'm afraid that I'm going to, not know what to do at school. I'm afraid I'm going to catch the virus. Kids can have a lot of fears because of what they're seeing around them. Sometimes they might act out with really negative, challenging behaviors, and underlying that is some fear. So we need to really look at sort of supporting and helping our children be able to talk about their fears in a safe environment, as well as for us as parents acknowledging fears that we may have, that we might be afraid that we're going to catch the virus, or that our children will, or about our children's mental or social state. So we can really benefit from just acknowledging the fears that we're facing. When we have those fears, some things that we can do to help manage them. First of all, just understand that it's normal. It's nothing to be ashamed of, whether we're talking about fear or really any other emotion that people might be facing right now. These are very scary times, honestly, that we're living in. And these fears are very, very normal. And it's okay to feel them. And in fact, in some ways, it would be expected that you would be feeling fears and that your children would be feeling fears right now. So just understand that it's normal, and that's something that's part of our normal daily life right now. Lamisha mentioned this earlier, and I'll just speak briefly to it, but to really think through the credibility of the news that you're consuming, make sure you're looking at credible news sources. Also the amount, I think that it's important to be in touch with the news and be watching the news and be monitoring things and having certain pieces of news that you're looking at. And yet at the same time, give yourself a limit, 30 minutes a day or an hour a day, or checking 1 or 2 news websites that you know and trust. And then give yourself limits with that too. And that might mean changing some of your social media, unfollowing some places on social media, to limit the times that you're exposed to that news. Because realistically, right now, many things that we're seeing in the news are very scary. And so, not to put your head in the sand and pretend that things aren't difficult, but to really kind of keep those in check and keep those in at a more manageable level. When it comes to fears, it's also important to develop more awareness of some of your thinking patterns. So this is somewhat related to the points that I was just making about self-talk and monitoring that. But are you somebody that tends to jump to conclusions or to catastrophize? So for example, my child cannot log on to Canvas and cannot get their assignments done today, means that my mind goes to this whole school year is going to be a complete disaster, right? Which, we can understand why parents today and why people today are making some of these jumps. But we also have to understand that we're making leaps when we do that, right? And we also could make leaps in another direction where we could say, okay, my child can't log in, it's not working today, tomorrow will be a better day, right? So we have to kind of start to see how the extent to which we are maybe contributing to some of our fears through some of these thinking patterns. And then really with the last point there, try to work more toward responding to and not reacting to your fears. So this is something we'll talk a little bit more about with respect to some of the other emotions, but we want to try to respond in our emotions and not be so reactive to them. So that means not getting extremely angry or snapping at somebody in our family when we're feeling fear, but being able to say, I'm feeling afraid right now. I feel afraid about what the school year is going to look like, and being able to verbalize that. The next emotion that I'll talk about for a few minutes is anger. And anger is one of those really interesting emotions because it's one that can often be wrapped up in relation to other emotions. So we might be feeling stressed and we express it as anger, or we might be afraid and we express it as anger. And so for these reasons, anger actually often is called a secondary emotion. And so it can be something that we might express as we might be experiencing some sort of emotion that we're going to express as anger. It comes out in an angry way, but actually there might be some more hurt or more uncomfortable emotion that's underlying it. Generally speaking, anger results when there's some sort of perceived or actual injustice or unfairness. And so we might feel angry that, we're in this situation. We might feel angry that our kids are, being left behind in this school year, or things of that nature. So it's kind of when we see things that just don't seem right and they're going to make us angry. When we're thinking about how to manage our anger, first of all, do try to look for those root emotions. Sometimes it really is just anger. And then other times we can see that, I might be experiencing anger. I might be feeling it as anger, but maybe I'm jealous. Maybe I'm jealous because there's other families that have more financial resources and they're able to navigate this challenge in an easier way. So maybe I can work more on that root emotion. It is healthy, though, to give yourself permission to feel anger. Anger is definitely an emotion that many of us feel very uncomfortable. I think that, sort of historically, from a gender framework, oftentimes females have been more socialized not to express anger, or that they should kind of hide their anger. So we do need to give ourselves permission to think about expressing and feeling emotion in healthy and constructive ways. And some of us were not raised, doing that, or we didn't necessarily have models for doing that. So we need to kind of give ourselves permission and say, you know what, sometimes I'm going to be angry and it's okay to be angry. We always emphasize through the Healthy Relationships Initiative in conflict, and which we'll talk about more in a couple slides. It's okay sometimes to use timeouts. So timeouts can be very healthy for conflict situations, but when we storm out of the room and don't return to a conversation and just leave people hanging, that actually can be more hurtful than helpful for navigating conflict. So if you find yourself feeling just so angry, you may say, I need to take a quick time out from this conversation. But during that timeout, try to focus on calming down, understanding your thoughts and feelings more, and preparing yourself to engage back in that conflict in a healthy way. And also, especially when you're feeling a lot of anger, try to focus on practicing healthy communication. So for example, especially when you realize that you're angry and you're just have a lot of anger building up inside, try to use I statements. So I feel angry because, or I feel upset because, versus lashing out at other people and saying, you are just lazy or you don't care about me, but really trying to use that healthy communication. And the other piece of communication that is especially challenging, I think, when we're feeling a lot of anger is listening, but being even more mindful of practicing active, attentive listening during anger can be very helpful, because sometimes we get so angry and wrapped up in those feelings of anger that we lose sight of another person, and they probably have some valid points and have some emotions that they may be facing too. Next, I'm going to move on to talking for a few minutes about sadness and loss. And of course, right now, a lot of us are just facing sadness. We've experienced different losses. Sometimes that means we are grieving the actual loss of a person who may have passed away, which can be especially challenging right now during these times, because funerals and other normal rituals to commemorate losses are maybe not available. But there's lots of other kinds of losses and sadness that people are facing. So right now, people are experiencing a lot of sadness and loss because there's a lot of disappointments that they're facing. They're grieving losses, like I said, of possibly of people, but even a loss of maybe time with people that are important to them. Grieving losses of events that they were excited about. Also listed on here is unmet expectations. I thought this year was going to be, one way, and it really hasn't been that way. So we can often feel a lot of sadness and losses. And I think in that case, it's important, again, it's important to give yourself permission to grieve, permission to feel sad. It's okay to cry. Sometimes just letting yourself cry and letting yourself feel sad, it can feel unhealthy because you're kind of letting yourself go to a sadder place, but actually expressing those emotions can be so helpful, and it can be even sort of a feeling of relief for you. I think in our culture and our society, we're very focused on being happy. We want to be happy like all the time. We want to be happy. And so we can start to feel, when we feel sad, or when we feel sad or loss, that we can feel like this isn't okay. I should be happy. I need to cheer myself right up. But really letting yourself kind of work through those emotions is a healthy way to do so. I will say, though, too, that we do, again, have to be mindful. If you find yourself crying just, more often than not for an extended period of time, and it's not connected to any particular reason, again, that would be a sign of extreme possible distress and a reason why you may want to reach out for some professional support, such as through a counselor. If you are facing losses, one helpful way to grieve those losses or to commemorate them is to consider some sort of ritual or symbol to commemorate those losses. So for example, thinking about creating some piece of artwork or some other way of creatively expressing yourself. Maybe you were really excited about some event that you had, going on in your life during this quarantine time, and it got canceled, and that's sad for you. Maybe there's some alternate symbolic thing you could do on that day, or on a day close to it, that could sort of symbolically commemorate that experience for you. So try to think about things that you can do, and those can be really helpful because it can help bring a sense of closure. And then once you've processed those emotions, do try to think through, what might it look like to have a more positive future? What are some growth opportunities that I have coming out of these losses? Maybe these opportunities to change the plans that you had or change the expectations, maybe in time, those will open up some new avenues for growth, new relationships, new connections, new interests for you. But again, first, I think it's always important for us to really allow ourselves to feel and acknowledge our feelings. And then the final emotion that I'm going to cover specifically is tension and conflict. And I debated a little bit whether to include this even in this presentation because we talk about emotions. And this is somewhat more of an interpersonal dynamic between people and relationships. But, let's face it, right now, people who are especially living together, spending a lot of time together, quarantining, even people who aren't living together and aren't able to see each other may find themselves feeling a lot of irritability, and tension in their relationships right now. And that's almost like kind of a shared emotional piece. Most of what we've been talking about so far has kind of been individual emotions, but this is about kind of how emotions are expressed in relationships. And so sometimes these can arise through differences, like differences in simple things like how do you load a dishwasher, to much bigger things like really important, significant differences in values. Or how about this one, for families right now, parents with kids in school, parents may have one view of how they would like their child to approach their remote learning school day, and the child may have another view. And those are some differences there, and that can lead to tension. So if you're finding yourself facing some tension and conflict in relationships, a few things you can do are, first of all, try to focus on self-awareness and look at what your role is in that tension. A lot of times when we find ourselves really irritable or tense, we tend to easily look at another person and say, this person needs to change, this person needs to do X, Y, and Z differently. And really often a much more helpful way to start is by looking at what your own role is and what might you be able to do differently to help create positive change in that relationship. Another suggestion would be to try to talk through problems during calmer times. So we all know, that if you're engaging in conflict, sometimes you just need to kind of address problems immediately. But if people are heated and really angry and really tense and irritable and frustrated with each other, things can be more likely to kind of spiral to an unhealthy place. So try to focus on more of a calmer time and use those as times to really talk through differences, like especially if there's differences in opinions about remote schooling or differences in opinions about things like mask wearing or safety procedures or social distancing, to try to talk through those in a calm and safe space. I think another really important mantra in today's time is choose your battles. And every single possible conflict issue in families does not need to turn into a conversation or into a conflict with another person. So sometimes if you get really frustrated by something like, how the dishwasher is loaded, that's a question you have to ask yourself. How important is this? On a scale of 1 to 10, is this really important? I think right now, if you're living with people that you're with all the time, sometimes those things that are maybe like a 1, 2, 3, or 4 that are kind of not quite as important or not quite as significant, sometimes it might be better to just let some of those slide, especially so we can focus on the bigger pieces and sort of acknowledge that people are going to be different and have different ways of doing things, which really relates to the next point on there, which is about keeping realistic and positive expectations in your relationships. No relationship is perfect. So as I said earlier, I'm with the Healthy Relationships Initiative. A lot of times people think, well, who has a healthy relationship in this day and age? And we always remind people through the healthy relationships, healthy doesn't mean perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. You're going to have conflict. You're going to have challenges in relationships. And people are human as well, I should add. We can't expect other people in our lives to be perfect or to be perfectly meeting our needs, or for children to be behaving perfectly. Like I remind myself that a lot of the time with I've got a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old sons. And I say to myself, they're 10 or they're 13. Like I have to expect some levels of disrespectful or misbehavior, So try and keep realistic perspectives and expectations, but also positive, and try to assume the best in other people and what they're doing. And then the last point that I'll make about tension and conflict, and then we'll open up for some questions, would be don't fear conflict. So conflict is a healthy part of relationships. And in fact, a lot of people think, they want to avoid conflict, but actually by doing that, you can let the tension really grow in your relationship so that the next time some conflict or tension issue arises, it could be even worse are more difficult to navigate because there's lingering tension and resentment from some issues from the past. So try not to fear conflict. We've got a lot of resources through the Healthy Relationships Initiative, and you can find those on our website at healthyrelationshipsinitiative.org to help people build new skills and get new information about how to navigate that conflict, but don't fear it. So those are my pieces there. Do we have any questions? Or if not, I do have a question for Lumisha, but do we have any other questions that have come up? All right, well, so Lumisha, I know earlier on you talked about routines and how it's important to be in routines. And I think one thing that a lot of families are struggling with right now is just that it's hard to have a routine. Like, how can I get in a routine when I don't know what school is going to look like 3 weeks from now? So is it okay for families to focus on shorter term routines, or kind of maybe have a week to week routine? Or is that something that ends up being very confusing for children?
I think that depends on your family, and also the age of your children. Typically, I think for older children, it might be, fun to them to change up responsibilities, and to have different things from week to week. For younger children, that could be the case, but generally having a set routine works for them better. And then as they get used to that, kind of transitioning them little by little as they get a little older and they start to understand, the transitions a little bit better. You can kind of change it up a little bit more. But definitely wanting to stress the routine piece because of a lot of the stress and the confusion and the anxiety that's going on right now, not only for the children, but also for the parents having some type of routine. You even think about in couples date night. A lot of people, Friday night was date night or Saturday night was date night. Maybe you're not able to go out to a restaurant, but maybe you can do something at home, ordering in, that keeping that routine. Maybe Friday night was family night or movie night, and maybe you went out to the movies. We're having movies in, or having some type of, time where, especially as a family, where you can still come together as one, and face this together. It helps both the child and the parent to feel that they're supported.
That's such a good point. And I was thinking while you were talking about things like date night and just having, kind of routines like that. And it seems to me like even kind of if we think about like automating some of that can make things a lot easier, right? So we've got so many things that are changing and, things that are up in the air for families right now. But in some ways, if you say, okay, every Friday night or every Thursday night is going to be date night and every Tuesday night is going to be movie night, that means on Tuesday night or Friday night or whatever night is, we don't have to think about it. That's a problem I don't have to worry about because I know that Saturday is pizza night and we're just going to get pizza and it's going to be okay. And so I wonder if one takeaway point for families might be to think about like some things that you might be able to just stick with, like, or bedtimes or wake up times or certain chores that children might take on. So try to find the things that you can have, but then also keep that flexibility for things that you can't necessarily plan ahead on.
Absolutely. And, even thinking about for the families with young children is reading, reading time, that is another thing that families do, and that we definitely encourage, especially through the partnership, is reading to your child. So definitely keeping that up, and having them choose books and changing that up and having that special time together. All of that is great. And, let's say if you do have a family night, and you kind of talk, maybe you say on Sunday nights or Sunday evenings, we get together and we plan our week. And that gives the family something to look forward to. So you're not just focused on, yes, you're trying to keep up with the news and making sure you're abreast of what's going on, but you also have some things to plan with your family. And that is key, is keeping the family together, keeping couples together, but especially as you're going through this, it gives you something to look forward to together as one.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because it is
Hmm.
hard to have routines right now in a very
Absolutely. Yeah.
non-routine time.
Right, right. So that can be tough. And then a question for you, Christine. You were talking about, developing, talking about problem solving and working together on that. What if a parent or someone says, well, my family doesn't want to talk? I feel like I'm doing all the talking, trying to come up with solutions. How do you get your family motivated to work together on figuring out, you know, working together and figure out how do we make this work instead of, let's say you've got two parents, you got a parent and a grandparent. How do we work together to figure all of this stuff out?
That is such a great question
Yeah.
because in relationships and families, we can really only we can influence other people, but we can't make other people do things. Even relatively younger children, we can't force them. We can with the younger children are the more that you can put a lot of boundaries around them. But the older children get, especially, we can't do that. And especially when we're talking about adults, you can't
Hmm.
control another adult. They're going to make choices for themselves. So
Right.
I think the key is there, one, to recognize that you are a separate person from the other people. So if you have one family member or multiple family members who are very resistant to making positive changes or engaging in conversations, still give them the option, say, hey, we're going to sit together and try to come up with some solutions about this. You're welcome to participate. If you don't want to participate, we're still working on these solutions together.
That's right.
So giving that option, and then also just thinking about how can you influence yourself by making the healthiest choices that you can. So
Mhm.
let's say you've got a child who just wants to be on screens and devices all day, and you're trying to tell them this is not healthy, this is not a good idea, let's get outside, let's exercise, let's go do something fun, and they're just not willing to do it.
Yeah.
Try to be that role model, and just remember that the best thing you can do is take care of yourself,
Mhm.
manage your emotions in the healthiest possible way that you can, get help if you need it. And it may not happen today, it
Yeah.
may not happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, there's a chance it may never happen, but hopefully, we can really influence other people positively with our choices. And the
Mhm.
more we're taking care of ourselves and meeting our own emotional needs and taking good care of ourselves, the more that we're going to be in a better position to continue to help have that positive influence on other people. So that's a real challenge, but I think that the more you can just kind of focus on yourself,
Yeah.
build things as positive as you can within the reality of your situation. And if part of that reality is somebody who's somewhat resistant or unwilling to change or engage with the family, then just do the best that you can in those circumstances and continue to work toward influencing them in positive ways.
Right. That's a good point. And just I know we're coming up on closing, but I just wanted to mention really quickly, we talked at the beginning about some of the common themes that people are dealing with right now. We do know that we have a lot of families, again, that are dealing with just meeting those basic needs, and that's stressful enough. And so we just wanted to encourage everyone. We had a session last week with NC Child where we talked about completing the census. And we just want to encourage everybody. This is a little postcard from NC Child, but we just want to encourage everyone, please, please, if you haven't already, please complete your 2020 census. This helps to ensure, which is going to help to alleviate, may help to alleviate some stress, a lot of stress that our families are feeling. Your census helps to ensure over the next 10 years that families have access to food programs, schools, childcare, helps to provide the funding that is needed. So help us help one another in dealing with stress and anxiety. This will help us and help our communities and help our children as we go forth. If each one of us complete our 2020 census, that is highly important. And you can go to my2020census.gov. So just wanted to put in a plug there for the census. We're talking about stress, talking about anxiety. I know it's a lot to remember, but this is very key. It only comes around once every 10 years. So you definitely want to complete this. Highly important to make sure that we can move those waiting lists, get children in childcare, get them the subsidies that they need, help families, with food access. This is key in helping as we're dealing with family emotions right now, completing your U.S. Census. So just wanted to mention that before we close.
All right. Thank you, Christine and Lumisha. This was very, very informative, very timely as always. Just appreciate you guys and your time, bringing your wisdom and your experience in to share for all the folks out here. And just want to thank you guys all for joining in and spending an hour with us. And we look forward to seeing you at our next topic. So we just hope everybody has a good day and a great Monday, and we'll catch you later. Bye-bye.